like to tell you about an 8-year-old girl named Sarah, not her real name, who was new to the school where I was working. Sarah was 7 years old. She had been taken by her crack-addicted mother to the East Coast several years ago, where she had been exposed to many terrible things, including being left and deserted several places. And at some point during the summer before she came back to Wisconsin, she had been deserted someplace for several weeks and had been taken in by child welfare. Her father from Wisconsin came and got her. When she came to the school, Sarah presented with many behavioral problems. She had a very hard time making eye contact. She would get upset with things, and sometimes when she did, she would have a very severe temper tantrum requiring removal from the room. Once she had a temper tantrum, she generally could not recover and was not able to go back to class the rest of that day. So if she had one in the morning, she was upset the whole rest of the day. When we did an intake with Sarah's father, one thing we were told was that Sarah never talked about her mother. What we found was that in therapy, where she wasn't pressured to talk about her mother, Sarah very easily and regularly brought her up. She talked about being angry at her mother, not wanting to see her anymore, her mother leaving her. Now this group was a girls' group, all of whom had experienced fairly significant trauma and violence in the home. We would start each group with a general warm-up where we would try to get the girls to move together. Oftentimes this was very difficult to do with this particular group. The one thing that would hook them in, though, was rhythmic patting. So we'd tap our knees, we'd tap the floor, we'd tap our arms, we'd tap our chest, we'd clap our hands. Girls would come up with different rhythms and the whole group would try them. Another thing that we would do in this group was to make up movement stories. The children were baby animals, and they would hatch out of an egg and different adventures would happen to them. Sarah was always an orphaned animal in these stories and never had anyone to take care of her. As the year went by, sometimes she would allow other children to befriend her and sometimes would share a home with them, and they might have a parent. But she never did. Through the stories, Sarah was able to express her feelings of desertion, her feelings of being alone. And this was very therapeutic for her because she was seen and heard by the group. A third thing that Sarah liked, or the group liked, were group dances and solo dances. So we would put on music and the group would dance around the room, and then at some point the group would sit down on this colorful cloth that was on the floor, and the rest of the girls, one girl at a time, would get up and would do a solo dance. And the rest of the girls and the therapist would watch her. The idea of being seen and heard is very significant in terms of healing. And what you're seen for doesn't have to be the healing part. It can be the pain. It can be the anger. It's just that you are acknowledged. You are seen for who you really are and what you really have inside of you. So one day, Sarah asked if she could do a solo dance. The rest of the group sat down to watch. Sarah got up. She wanted no music for this. She laid down on the floor, on her stomach, her hands like claws, and she proceeded to try to inch her way across the room using her toes and her fingers. And yet she couldn't move at all. And Sarah told us she was a baby animal trying to get to her mother. And she just kept doing this with a very pained face. The other girls really felt Sarah's pain. And normally we just watch in silence when somebody's dancing. They all said, "Let us help you. We'll pull you across. We'll get you there. And Sarah very intelligently said, no, I have to do this myself. And what we saw was Sarah's both longing and inability to receive what she knew she couldn't get, which was her mother's love. Well, Sarah, during the year, I already told you about her significant temper tantrums, gradually changed during the year. The first thing that happened was the number of tantrums she had decreased. Then, about a month later, what would happen is maybe she would have a severe temper tantrum, but she would recover, and she would be able to go back to the classroom and maybe have a good day for the rest of the day. And then by the end of the year, after this dance, what started to happen was that Sarah would put herself, would get upset in class, would put herself in a little timeout, where she would sit in the classroom. She wouldn't leave the classroom, take some breaths, maybe sit there 5 or 10 minutes, and would be able to then rejoin the group. And that was really pretty much the end of her temper tantrums. 1 year later, Sarah was in another group. This was a mixed group, where one of the children expressed how frustrating it was to not be accepted for who he was. And Sarah said, everyone should be accepted for who they are. You're okay just the way you are. This was so moving to me, to see this child who had come in not being able to give anything to anyone else, barely able to manage herself, now being able to offer another child the support that he desperately needed.